Well, hello everyone. My name is Emily Hopkins from Meg Languages, and I'm joined by two of my teammates who are very well versed in the world of language learning and our topic for today, which is all about experiential learning through AR and VR technology. So I'm going to turn it over to Ash first. Ash, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. My name is Ash Raja. I work at Meg in the operations and innovation space, working with VR, AR, all exciting things in digital learning and all sorts of things. So, yeah, happy to be here to chat a little bit more about what we've been working on.
Hi, I'm Luke Stratton, and I am an education specialist at Meg, and I am currently helping design virtual reality games for Meg, specifically for cultural learning. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. And in terms of my background, I'm a former classroom teacher of 15 years, teaching French and Russian, so language and culture all the way in that classroom environment. So I'm excited to bring that into the XR, the extended reality environment, and its many possible manifestations.
Perfect. Well, we're going to talk about several areas in the world of XR, and I'm going to set you all up with a couple of questions to help anyone who might be watching this get acquainted with it as well. So, the first question I have, and it's going to involve several sub questions underneath it as well, but we'll start with the main one, which is how can teachers use XR experiences in the classroom? What does that look like?
I think a great way just to begin to use XR experiences is to start with AR, augmented reality, which could be used to show a landmark in a country that is being studied, or some other interesting cultural artifact on a device to make that artifact feel more real to students, to make it more tangible seeming, and to introduce this amazement factor that you get when you use this technology. And that technology is simply using a photo that has been rigged to trigger a 3D AR image, and then students can view that image and can look around it as though it were a 3D object in their classroom. So there's something really great about that, because it's like taking a trip to a museum without leaving the classroom, and it suggests that there's this extra level of experience that can occur right there in your classroom, only using a device and a sheet of paper that has an image printed on it.
That's pretty cool. I mean, how with classrooms, obviously technology ranges, all sorts of all over the spectrum, really. And so this is a very easy entry point. It sounds like. So follow-up question to this, and surely anybody can take this one, is what technology and what degree of familiarity with technology do classroom teachers need to have to achieve that step?
Sure. So for the AR materials, if you have a mobile device like a tablet or a phone, and that device is almost always equipped with a camera, then you're pretty much good to go, because that device will allow you to lock onto that image that is the AR image, the printed out image, and show the AR image associated with it, which would be a 3D image, like the type of image you'd see in virtual reality. So as long as you're pretty much familiar with using a mobile device like that and the camera, then there's not much else you need to know aside from getting into the app that will trigger that image. So it's pretty intuitive, it's pretty easy, there's no great learning curve here. So this is a rapidly applicable technology.
Thanks, Luke. I think the other thing that was very widely used right now and is really accessible is the use of 360 videos within virtual reality. And I saw something cool recently, which a university did, which they had archaeologists take videos of pyramids of Giza down right underneath inside the pyramids. And so you've got all of these different 360 videos going around, and you can see and click And as you're walking through them, you can click on various parts of what you see and information would pop up. So if kids are using the headset, then they're basically walking through the pyramids of Giza and literally just finding out information in real time, as if a guide was there telling them, you know, what the pyramids are about. And I thought it was really cool and a really nice way of learning about history, learning about geography, and all these different things that you can apply across any subjects in school. 360 videos being one of them. And honestly, the barrier of entry is so low. As long as you've got even if you don't have a VR headset and you've got a computer with you, you can, or a tablet or a phone, you're essentially able to go on that excursion. So
sounds like so much fun. I want to go. I want to do it.
Yeah, I'll send you the link for sure.
Yeah, please. So also, you know, obviously a big topic of conversation in all classrooms is around differentiation, you know, in all aspects of education. What does differentiation look like in these experiential reality experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question, and this is always a tough one for teachers. So one thing that's really nice about, say, starting with AR images, if you have a selection of images, differentiation can occur on the level of student interest, if they might be drawn to one image or another, and can explore what that image means for them. So I think that's a basic degree of differentiation with student agency being recognized. And so I think we all can agree that if a student is intrigued by something and drawn to it, that it will be a more powerful and memorable learning experience for them. But in terms of different learning styles, it can, with using extended reality technology, there are ways that technology can adapt to their learning. And this is something that I think we will be seeing more of, as a lot of people are hearing about ChatGPT and AI as it's involved in the learning process. So these experiences would adapt to the students' needs, to their skill level as they're progressing through the game and whatnot. At least that's something that we're hoping to build towards ourselves. I think that is a little bit more in the future for us, so that differentiated learning can occur through the use of artificial intelligence.
I'll just say that I think the XR provides a lot of opportunities for personalized learning as well, which is the idea of, you know, essentially kids can go as fast as they want. They've got a lot of agency to go through the environment any way they'd like to experience it. And so a part of that as well is, if you are the sort of person who likes to spend more time on one thing, for instance, if you're going into the pyramids of Giza and you want to spend the whole half an hour lesson looking at one wall and really learning about it, you could do that too. And that's not something that's readily available in the classroom. You're usually kind of at the mercy of the teacher facilitating through this lesson, and you're learning at the pace that everyone else is learning. But in an XR environment, you're able to personalize that for yourself. And I think that's a very important factor that will become very, very useful for teachers as well in the classroom in terms of differentiated learning.
Absolutely. And the pyramids of Giza example is really kind of making me think of, you know, the immersion levels and the immersion scenarios that we've talked about, you know, low immersion versus high immersion. Obviously, putting on goggles is a very high immersion experience. So talk a little bit about the difference between low versus high immersion scenarios.
Well, and something I want to tag on to this, as well as to answer that question that we haven't mentioned yet, and I think this applies to differentiated learning as well, is that in an immersion type environment, students are feeling less anxiety. There are studies that are showing that students are feeling really present in that new world to a degree that they're more interested in the discovery aspect, and they're less they're their anxiety has lowered because it doesn't feel like a high stakes environment where they have to find the answer right away or get it right. So this goes along with what Ash was saying about the student being able to focus on what they want to for however long they want to. In this respect, the student is just given this chance to go with the flow of the learning as it's presented to them in this environment. So that low anxiety element, I think, helps resolve other issues that might be connected to learning difficulty in that environment. So that differentiation can be happening by lowering anxiety, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And so low immersion versus high immersion environments. The low immersion environment would be when you have a desktop or a tablet and device and you're looking at that, so you don't have a headset on. A high immersion environment is when you have that headset on. So those environments are both ways to experience a type of presence in a new world, which is really interesting. Both of them do allow for this creation of memories, what seem like memories living in a different environment. So I think that's a really powerful moment for learning, that even if you don't have the rest of the world closed off in that head-mounted display, which it may not be the case. It's okay. A low immersion environment can really get students engaged as well.
Yeah, I think the idea of immersion plays into the idea of embodiment of identities, for instance, like adapting avatars. And that sort of helps. I think the research shows a lot about how students who, suffer from anxiety tend to deal very well with being able to pick avatars and creating how they look like, and almost creating this identity for themselves that they are proud of and that they are happy to experience within the XR environment. So that's something that is the research is emerging. It's not something that we're just always keeping abreast of, but initial studies are showing that it's helping a lot of students with particularly differentiated needs like ASD or dyslexia are experiencing positive impacts of learning in said environments through the use of such mechanisms like identity building in avatars and all that sort of things.
That's very interesting. I mean, obviously we're about to talk about benefits now, and we've already touched on two very important ones, which is the differentiation factor and the personalized learning and everything that we can do with that. And obviously lessening anxiety, especially in school environments where, we're seeing so much data coming out about how much more anxiety students have in general in school. And so to have an outlet like this for them is certainly a benefit for helping, calm some of that and giving them a place within the school environment that might, make improvements across the board in other ways too. So it's really interesting to see how, one aspect could potentially, as, more studies are done about this, there's a lot of potential for this to have, major implications. So that's exciting. What other benefits do you all see of XR learning experiences?
I think XR learning is a great place for social emotional learning to occur, and this might seem a little counterintuitive because the students are focused on a device or in a head-mounted display, but because this is an environment where they feel free to explore, where that anxiety is reduced, their level of personal comfort and safety is higher. So it's a place where they can perhaps talk to one another through that, through being in that extended reality environment in a way that they wouldn't feel before, allowing a type of vulnerability that they might not have been able to allow themselves before. So there's a sort of social element to this experience that can happen, and it's one where we sort of leave the trappings of the classroom where perhaps some social dynamics are already set in place, and we enter this creative world where the learning is happening and social dynamics can be modified, and hopefully in a more positive way. So I think that's something great about this. And in line with that as well, when we're talking about teaching culture, putting students in an environment where they're perceiving the world from a different lens, perceiving an environment that's new to them, that might be perceived as other to them. If they're learning about Chinese culture, for example, in this environment, they're learning empathy because they're perspective taking. They're looking at their own perspective and biases, at least intuitively, right? And we can make that more explicit, but they're seeing different people as they might see them in the world, and they're learning about those people and how they might behave and why. So I think that's a really powerful moment here, that empathy can be built through these experiences. And when I say this, I'm thinking of a project that the United Nations recently did where they used footage that was an immersive video experience for ambassadors and other diplomatic workers to see what was happening in I think it was these fields in Colombia where workers were, and this was a way to convey a real sense of the difficulties incurred by these workers, the pressures on these workers. So this video was being used for a peacekeeping mission to impart empathy to these diplomats. So there's really an incredible chance here to teach our students to empathize with others, to put themselves in the position of others, and to have a greater sense of the diversity and challenges of humanity.
Diversity, and I think that's a huge potential and benefit here for the equity for students as well, and all of the experiences that you mentioned gives a lot of access for people who might not necessarily have access to these things. For instance, learning about particular cultures or traveling to another place in which they might be learning the culture through, actually, talking to somebody in that space, or learning about a particular country through VR experiences, or even peacekeeping missions, and having access to critical service learning perspectives that some students might not have had the opportunity to, particularly if you're not from areas in which you are well resourced. So this is an opportunity, and maybe it hasn't been done yet, but I think it's a huge opportunity for XR to fill the gaps in those spaces as well.
Absolutely. So speaking of all this XR, we've been working on our very own Culture Quest experience, and we would love to hear more about specifically the goals you're trying to accomplish through this Culture Quest experience, and anything else that you think would help people get to know it a little better.
Yeah, there's so much to say about the Culture Quest. It's hard to know where to begin with it. Right now, we're in the midst of designing an experience for learning about Chinese culture. It happens on a VR map of the Great Wall of China, and it's an experience where students visit the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac, and those animals impart activities and questions to the students that will help them learn more about different aspects of Chinese culture. One of the cycles in this Culture Quest focuses on a birthday quest, in which students have to learn about the right color for wrapping a birthday gift in China, what gifts are acceptable and what gifts are taboo. And this quest culminates with a fun celebratory moment, as does the second quest, which has to do with the Lunar New Year. And in that quest, students are invited to learn more about the Lunar New Year across East Asian and South Asian countries. So there's a lot of rich learning that can happen there. And this is all happening in this open space, immersive environment, right? A VR environment, and it can be in a low immersion setting with a desktop, where students just get to explore and get to see these cool animals out in a landscape, and get to start building a sense of familiarity with different aspects of Chinese culture that I think they'll find really interesting. There's some great points of comparison and contrast that come up between Chinese culture and what we imagine the students' home culture to be.
That leads us right into this, talk about intercultural understanding through XR, and we can dive, in more detail into our culture quests where appropriate. But how can XR experiences help teach culture? What does that even look like?
I'll talk a little bit about some experiences that I've had in using VR to learn a language within a specific culture. So for instance, there is an app called Immerse Me in which you are basically dropped. Like I was trying to learn Italian and you literally dropped in the middle of like Piazza San Marco, and you're sitting there and they're asking you to go forward and order a coffee, and in that exchange you're not just ordering a coffee, but you're seeing how people's gestures are, the things that you don't normally, like when you're learning it off just a regular sort of app or from paper or anything that's like very school-centered way of learning languages. You miss a lot of those nuance in picking up cultural ways in which people communicate. For instance, I think that was a huge thing. Like for instance, I found out how expressive Italians are when they're saying hello or asking specific things, and just in the hand gestures. And that's a one small example of, I think, what XR is able to do when you are using it in a way that is supplementing your learning of either languages or anything else. But beyond that, within intercultural understanding, I think it's an exciting way to learn about things rather than watching a video or like reading about things. It's just another way of actually being able to contextualize it and use it in for instance, if you're learning about very interesting concepts in our culture quest about intergenerational relationships, and us being able to learn that in a fun, exciting way, like in a quest, it almost doesn't feel like learning. It feels like you're playing a game and you're picking up all of these wonderful tidbits along the way that will help you, in your intercultural understanding and in your life.
I think what's really cool about the Culture Quest, for example, or just any VR experience where multiple students are present in that experience, is that they get to process this cultural understanding together. In the Culture Quest, students can talk to one another, and their voices will be heard if they're proximate to one another as avatars in there. So I think part of intercultural learning that's happening is not only the learning that you're getting, which is the content about Chinese culture, for example, but it's the fact of processing that learning with someone else. And that person might be someone, well, we're all different in our own ways, right? So they might be from a culture similar to yours, but you're still negotiating this idea of that new knowledge and trying to make sense of it. And I think that experience as a shared experience is an intercultural experience in itself. So I think it's important to point out that in these immersive experiences, like I said before, there's a social element to it, and this social element can be a really rich one, where you're both really feeling present and engaged with this world, and you're figuring it out together. I know that when I was living abroad, I had a lot of experiences that naturally occur, so these organic random experiences that happen, and what a joy it would have been to have someone there alongside with me just to figure out what that was, rather than go home to my host mom and try to articulate it in a way, in Russian, in a way that helped me process through it. So I think this sort of joint and shared experience here is part of the richer intercultural element that students are digging into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we discussed this a little bit, actually, Ash, when you were talking about the San Marco experience. It was reminding me of like, okay, you're having that experience in a virtual type setting, but that is extremely applicable to the real world. honestly, the next lesson should be how to negotiate with the pigeons of San Marco, but
Yeah.
that's for another time. But anyway, what does that look like, in terms of, having these experiential XR, AR, VR experiences and applying it? What can it achieve in that XR realm so that we can apply it to real world?
I think I'll take it on from a language perspective. So if you're learning a language in the classroom, you have very limited opportunities to practice it sometimes. It's like, especially if you're living in a country in which that particular language is not widely spoken. So when you leave the classroom, essentially that's where it ends, right? Like the idea of contextualizing and using this information. In XR, it's limitless. You can explore it, you can contextualize it, you can experience it with other people, and you can practice it as much as you want. And you're using it in a way that you would if you were using it in a real life setting, because you're talking to someone and negotiating in a particular language, or you're learning about a language, or learning how to apply a language in various scenarios, as if you were in real life. And so I think those things are incredibly useful, and it's going to be so much richer as a learning experience than it were if you were kind of limited to the four walls of a classroom.
Absolutely. And obviously some of the social emotional learning components that Luke was mentioning as benefits early, obviously that's applicable to real life, right? Perspective taking is hugely applicable. Lowering your anxiety over here is hugely applicable to the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I mean, this is just something that is quite new in certain fields for us in mainstream education, but this is something that has been used in like aviation for a long time. This is something that's been used in medicine for a long time in terms of practicing surgery. Anything that's high stakes, right? Like that would require you to have a bit more care, has been applied. VR has been applied in those instances, and it's been found to be incredibly useful because we have successful pilots and surgeons and all of these things having trained using VR technologies. And so there's no reason why we can't apply that to everything else: languages, intercultural learning, history, all the other things. And yeah, it's an exciting time for us. I think that we are able to have access to it now.
Absolutely. And I'm going to close out with the last question. Obviously, we've covered a wide range of things. So if there's anything we need to revisit, we certainly can. But what could a teacher who is hearing this for the first time, what could they do to make use of XR learning right now?
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources out there that they can already go to. Ash already mentioned Immerse Me, so that might be something that is possible for a teacher to try if they want to go there. Google Expeditions has AR and VR elements available, as does Google Arts and Culture. There are some good resources there as well. If you use Nearpod in the classroom, there are XR applications for that. And there are other language-specific resources like Mondly, if you've heard of that language learning app. So that exists as well. So these are already available for use and can be applied in the classroom pretty easily. Of course, some of them might require paying for them, but most of the first couple ones I mentioned do not. Yeah, so
just to add to that, there are other things that teachers would be able to do. There's an app, for instance, like called CoSpaces, which you are able to create worlds with your students. And I think that's something to sort of think about it like a Minecraft sort of situation where you are building the world in which you are going to be inhabiting. And I think for teachers, starting with that sort of collaborative exercise with their students could be a useful way to introduce them to a digital VR building environment. And you can do multiple things. You're learning about architecture, building, but you're also learning about teamwork and collaboration and all of the SEL capacities that we were talking about as well through an activity like that. So that's something that they could probably use right now, because these are all existing platforms that can be leveraged on, which usually have educator trials or educator accounts that you'd be able to use. And yeah, beyond that, obviously, not to have a plug, but obviously we've got our Culture Quest ready. So if anyone wants to experience that, our Culture Quests are a good way to get students started into a digital intercultural learning world, where they can explore the Great Wall and learn a little bit more about East Asian culture.